All right, we're about to dive into a really fascinating and, yeah, pretty controversial Christian belief. It's this idea that the biblical figure known as the beast isn't some threat way off in the future, but might actually be walking among us right now. So, let's get into it.
So the whole thing really boils down to this one provocative question. What if the biggest villain in the Bible isn't someone we're waiting for, but is a master of disguise who's already here? That's the core idea we're going to unpack today.
Okay, so first, let's just get on the same page. When we say the beast, we're talking about a figure from the book of Revelation. The prophecy describes someone with just, immense global power. And this is the key part, someone who is a master of deception. You'll hear this term, by the way, used pretty much interchangeably with Antichrist.
Okay, so let's jump into the first big idea behind this whole theory. The idea that this figure isn't coming, they're already here, and they've been subtly working their way into our world for centuries.
And this is really where you see the fundamental split in thinking. Mainstream Christian theology, it generally says the Antichrist is a figure who's going to show up at the very end of times. But the belief we're looking at today says, no, that's a misreading. It argues the work of this deceptive power is actually a slow, quiet process that's been going on for generations.
And, proponents of this theory, they don't just pull this out of thin air. They point directly to Scripture to back it up. They'll highlight a passage like this one from 1 John and argue that the spirit of the Antichrist isn't just one single person in the future, but it's something that can exist in many people throughout history, all sort of paving the way for a final figure.
Okay, so if this figure is already here, how in the world would you even spot them? Well, this is where it gets interesting. Proponents of this theory have put together a kind of profile based on how they interpret the descriptions in the Bible.
And what's really fascinating here is how these traits are adapted for today. Believers aren't looking for some monster with horns, right? They're looking for a charismatic leader, someone who can pull off miracles, whether they're technological breakthroughs, political deals, or social movements that just completely captivate everybody. They're looking for someone who seems totally normal, maybe even like a great person, but who holds huge global power and is, little by little, pushing society away from traditional values.
And they take this checklist and apply it to the real world. For people who follow this theory, pretty much anyone with a global platform, we're talking political leaders, tech billionaires, media moguls, they all become potential candidates, constantly being watched for these hidden signs.
All right, this brings us to the part of this belief system that causes the most controversy, when this abstract profile gets applied to a very real, very well-known public figure.
According to the source material we're looking at, one of the main figures of suspicion for some of these groups is none other than the current head of the Catholic Church, Pope Francis. Now, I have to be super clear here. This is absolutely a fringe view. But let's look at why they make this claim. And right here, you can really see their logic at work. They take actions that most of the world would see as positive, and they reinterpret them through this lens of deep suspicion. So from their perspective, when the Pope works to build bridges with other religions, it's not about promoting peace. It's about watering down core Christian beliefs. His calls for social justice, they see that as a secret push for a single global government, a so-called New World Order. Every diplomatic move is seen as possible evidence of some hidden manipulative game.
Okay, so that's the fringe theory. A pretty wild one. But what's the comeback? What does mainstream Christianity have to say about all these claims? Let's check out the counterpoint.
And the disagreements here, they aren't small, they are huge. Mainstream theologians argue that this kind of speculation just completely misunderstands what biblical prophecy is all about. They see it as symbolic warnings about the future, not as a guidebook for identifying people today. They'd say that focusing on finding a beast right now totally distracts from the Bible's actual message, which is about faith and just being watchful in a general sense. And they raise some really sharp questions that this theory has a hard time answering. I mean, think about it. If anyone can be labeled the Antichrist just for promoting peace or social justice, how do you stop people from just throwing around false accusations? What's the standard? And maybe the biggest question of all, how do you tell the difference between someone genuinely trying to do good in the world and someone with a secret, sinister agenda? These are the logical problems the theory just can't seem to get past.
So, we've looked at this fringe idea. We've looked at the mainstream pushback. So what are we supposed to do with all this? What's the ultimate takeaway? Well, the source material suggests that maybe this whole debate about who the beast is kind of misses the point. It argues that the real lesson here isn't about pointing fingers or making a list of suspects. Instead, the real core message, and this is something that's relevant to everybody, no matter what you believe, is about the timeless danger of deception.
It's a warning that powerful ideas and powerful, influential people can sometimes lead us down the wrong path. And that means the most important skill we can possibly have is the ability to think critically and figure out the truth for ourselves.
And that really leaves us with one last massive question. In our world today, where we're just bombarded with information and opinions and agendas from every direction, how do you personally sort through it all? How do you separate what's real from what's designed to fool you? That, right there, might be the real challenge this ancient prophecy poses to all of us today.